The Rebbe initially did not accept leadership. We'll talk about that tomorrow, how for an entire year, the Rebbe refused to accept leadership. And finally, on the day of the Yartzeit, which means the following year on Yud Shvat, there was a Farbrengen. And at that Farbrengen, the Rebbe said a Maimer. And when the Rebbe says a Maimer, that was an indication that the Rebbe accepted leadership, because only a Rebbe will say a Maimer. Farbrengens and speeches and the talk, good morning and everything else. This is something which we can all do. Even Hasidim, older Hasidim will do that, but a Maimer is something which only is said by a Rebbe. Here's the Svarim, there's still more left over here. Take this. We're doing lessons in Maimarim, the one that has Basi Lagani 5,711, 5711, and we're on page 33. So the first Maimer that the Rebbe said was with the same beginning, Basi Lagani. And the Maimer the Rebbe said was a commentary, insight, explanation to the Maimer that the Friedrich Rebbe said. That because this Maimer is not an ordinary Maimer, this Maimer marks the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership. So it's customary every year that we relearn this Maimer again. Tomorrow, Rabbi Paper here, Mirza Hashem. So he'll do the Maimer Basilagani that the Friedrich Rebbe said, the original. But today, what we want to do is the Maimer from 5711, the Rebbe's first Maimer. Just as an introduction, the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer is based on a medrash. And the medrash says that initially when Hashem created the world, the presence of Hashem was here on this physical world. Again, it's based on the pasuk Basi Lagani, which means I came to my garden. Achoisi, my sister, Kala, my bride. This is Hashem speaking in an affectionate way about the Bnei Yisrael, but it starts off, I came to my garden. And the Medrash says, based on the way it's worded, that it means not just my garden, it means the place where I was initially. What does that mean? It means that initially when Hashem created the world, his Shekhinah, his presence was here on this physical world. But then when Adam and Chava ate from the tree, because of that sin, the Shekhinah left this world and it ascended to the heaven. There are 7 heavens. So when the next sin was committed, the sin that Cain killed his brother Hevel, the Shekhinah again was removed from the heaven to the second heaven. And then there were the sins of the people of the generation of the Mabul. So it moved again. And then there was also Avodah Zarah. People started to worship idols. Then it went from the second heaven to the third heaven. Then the Mabul went to the fourth heaven. And this is how the Shekhinah left this world stage by stage until it went to the 7th heaven. So the Shekhinah was sort of 7 heavens away from earth. And then came Avraham Avinu, the first of the tzaddikim to really light up this world. And he brought the Shekhinah down from the 7th heaven to the 6th. And then came Yitzchak, he brought it down from the 6th to the 5th. Then came Yaakov, he brought it down from the 5th to the 4th. And then finally came Moshe Rabbeinu, who was again the 7th, and he brought it down from the 7th heaven from the 1st heaven to earth. And this is connected to the saying, Kol Hashvin Chavivim, the 7th are the most precious. 7th day in the week is Shabbos, the 7th year in the yearly cycles is the sabbatical year. The 7th month is the month of Tishrei. And here the 7th person was Moshe Rabbeinu, who brought the Shekhinah down to earth. So now here's the Rebbe's explanation, adding more insight into this. Page 33, we read from the bottom of the page where you can follow. You have the Hebrew English. Regarding the statement that the essence of the Shekhinah was manifested in the lower realms, from following the flow of the Medrash, it could be understood that it implies, when it says the lower realms, the physical world. Sometimes when it says the lower realms, it doesn't mean the physical world. In the spiritual realm itself, there are many worlds. There are higher worlds and there are lower worlds. So sometimes it means one of the lower worlds in the physical, spiritual realm. But over here, it seems to imply that it means the physical here in this physical world. But the Medrash proceeds to explain that because of the sin of the tree of knowledge, Eitz Hadas, the Shekhinah withdrew and drew from earth to heaven. And then when the Torah is given at Har Sinai, Hashem says, I came back to my garden where I was originally. Now the Rebbe goes on to explain the following. The primary dimension of the withdrawal of Hashem's presence that came about as a result of the sin was brought about specifically by the sin of the tree Eitz Hadas. In other words, there were 7 generations, 7 sins that caused 7 times the Shekhinah to keep moving away. But the one that's the primary one is Eitz Hadas. Just like regard to the seriousness of the sin. I mean, the reason why Eitz Hadas is the primary one, why does that have more prominence than the other sins? He explains. It's the ikar of all the sins. Why? Sharei, ayidei chet Eitz Hadas, because of chet Eitz Hadas, ha'inesinus mokum l'shar chatoyim, which means had Adam Arishan and Chava not eaten from the fruit of the tree, then there never would have been potential for sin. Godliness would have been so revealed in the world, nobody would commit a sin. So it's not only they committed a sin, they're the ones who allowed the place and potential. They sort of made it possible for people to sin. So really this was the source that caused all the rest. So Chet Eitz Hadas, that was the cause. The Goyim, the Chatoim, the Kayin Enish, that caused the sin of Kayin, who killed his brother. And Enish, he is the one who introduced idol worship. So number one, that's one reason why this sin is the primary one. Another thing, the same also applies to the effect of the sin. The withdrawal of the Shekhinah that was caused by the first sin is really primary compared to the others. The fundamental withdrawal of the Shekhinah is the withdrawal from the physical world more than the withdrawal from the spiritual world. Which means, just like originally the essence of the Shekhinah was in the physical world, so too, when we say that the Shekhinah left, where is the main place that it is relevant? Where's the main place where it's felt? Mainly in the fact that it's absent here in this physical world. And how was this accomplished? Now he's going to explain why. Why is this, how it affected this world, more important than how it affects all the other worlds? This also explains the reason in the previous Rebbe's Maimer, when he talks about the 7 generations of sin, he says the first one was Chet Eitz Hadas, eating from the tree. And then there was Cain, who killed his brother, and Enosh, who avodah zarah. So he asks, why did the Friedrich Rebbe list it this way? Why not all 3 together? Why did he first Chet Hadas, and then he starts listing the other ones? And the answer is because Chet Eitz Hadas is different than the other ones. It's the primary and it's the cause for everything else. And also, it's the most relevant. This needs to be explained. Why is it the most relevant? Because the sins of Cain and Enosh, again, Cain's sin was that he killed his brother Hevel. Enosh is the first person to introduce idol worship in the world. So when they did their sins, they caused the Shekhinah to ascend from one heaven to the next. But the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, that caused that it should be withdrawn from earth to heaven. And that's more relevant than anything else. Why? The Vads, there are two reasons. The Vads, there is besides the fact, besides the fact that that's what primarily affects us, it's also the most important aspect of Hashem's presence being withdrawn. Let me explain that. First of all, the Rebbe says, for us, what counts the most is the fact that it's not here. I mean, to think and to compare, if Chas v'Shalom, a person passes away, so it's a tragedy. But we know that as time goes on, the neshama rises to a higher level and a higher level and a higher level, which means to some extent it's further away from us. So even though time goes by and the soul goes higher and higher and further, but what matters to a person more than anything else is that the soul is not down here. That's what matters to us more than anything else. We want this person to be here. The same with Hashem's presence. And the most important thing is that his presence is found here. That's more relevant to us. That's number one. The second point is, even besides the fact that it's relevant to us, in its own right, what's more important for Hashem, that his presence is down to earth, because this earth is the main purpose of creation. So what happens here is more important than anything else that happens in all the worlds. All the worlds were created for this world. Whatever happens in all the world affects this world. So what's the most important is what happens down here. So this was all about the sin. Now he's going to talk about the reverse, when the Shekhinah came back. And after that, 7 righteous men, they arose and they brought the Shekhinah back down to this world, starting with Avraham Avinu. Abraham merited, and he brought the Shekhinah down from heaven number 7 to number 6. I always wondered when I would think about the 7 heavens, which, by the way, we should be thinking about it every day. Where do we think about the 7 heavens every day? Every day. At least we should be thinking about it every day. In fact, not only every day, but 3 times a day. And for some people, 4 times a day. Shema. In the Shema, we say, Hashem Elokeinu, God our God, God is one, Echad. So the Gemara says, I think Rashi says it in Chumash, I'm not mistaken, that Echad means Aleph stands for Hashem, he's one. Ches is number 8. What does that stand for? The 7 heavens and the earth, which means he's one up there and down here. And the Dalet means the 4 directions of north, east, south, and west. Basically, Hashem is everywhere. He's up there, he's down here, he's all different directions. As the famous song for the children goes, Hashem is here, Hashem is there. Hashem is truly everywhere. So I always wondered, are these 7 heavens physical heavens or spiritual heavens? Because as far as I know, there's only one heaven up there. But there's actually a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, where it says 7 heavens, and it adds the physical and the spiritual. So apparently it's both. In other words, it probably means that up until a certain distance is one heaven, and further distance is considered a second heaven, and a further distance is a third heaven, simply physically. Then there's also spiritually that each one of these heavens is a different spiritual dimension, a part of this physical world. So this is the way it went. Avraham Avinu brought it down 1 level, Yitzchak a 2nd level, Yaakov a 3rd level, and then came Moshe, Shu Hashvi, he was the 7th, and all those who are 7th are cherished the most. They brought the Shekhinah down to this world below. And the primary aspect of drawing down the Shekhinah was mainly Moshe. Again, why? Because they all brought the Shekhinah down from heaven to heaven. Moshe was the one who brought it down from heaven to earth. Shrei Moshe Dafke, it was he who drew down the Shekhinah, the Mata Baretz, back into this world. So now we draw the parallel, just like we explained before, that the primary thing is what happens with this earth. So the biggest withdrawal was withdrawal from this physical earth. So to the reverse, when the Shekhinah comes back, what's most relevant and what's the most sort of the biggest accomplishment is when we bring the Shekhinah back down to earth. Shem should be in a silik mamata l'mayla. Right, just like when we talk about the Shekhinah being withdrawn from down up. The main thing is the chet of Eitzadas. Why? Because with this it went away from earth. The same thing applies with the reverse when we're talking about the Shekhinah being drawn down and coming back from above to bring it down. Same too, the most important element of bringing the Shekhinah down is most relevant is bringing it down to earth. And why? For the same two reasons that he gave before. Levadze, besides the fact besides the fact that it's most relevant to us, it's like we'll be talking now again about a person who passed away, and we're saying soon is going to be Tkes HaMesim. And therefore, right now, let's say the neshama is already coming down lower and lower and closer to this world. So everybody's excited to hear the neshama is getting closer and closer and closer. But what's the most important is when the neshama appears on this physical planet. Same with Hashem. It's getting closer and closer and closer. But what's relevant to us more than anything else is to see him here in this physical world. Besides that, in its own right, and just in terms of what's most important in essence, and for Hashem, is dafka the Shekhinah coming down to this world. Is there Nasa de Moshe Dafka, and who's the one who did this? This is Moshe Rabbeinu.
Is there an exact time given for when he does this? Like, is it out at Mount Sinai?
Yeah, there is a time that's given. Basically, you can say there are three parts to the process. The first part was taking Yidden out of Mitzrayim, and then Hashem was revealed in a very big way, but still wasn't totally revealed. When the Torah was given, that's really when it happened. And when was it sort of, what was the clincher? When they built the Mishkan. They built the sanctuary, and Hashem Shekhinah came down into this building. So this is when Shekhinah finally came down to this physical world. And I guess the same applies now. Like, what's going to be the turning point where we're going to say Hashem Shekhinah is back here on earth? I think it would mean when we see the Beis Hamikdash, the third one standing. And I guess we must also say, let's say we say Avraham Avinu brought it down from the seventh heaven to the sixth. When did he do that? He has the same question. When exactly did that happen? He did a lot of amazing things through his life. He had 10 tests. He did the test of Yakeda. He had brought Yitzhak into the world. At which point? He did the Bris Milah. And obviously everything he did throughout his lifetime was constantly bringing it down. And probably it meant at the end of his life, which was the culmination of everything he did, that's when the Shekhinah came down to this world. And the same with Yitzhak, and the same with Yaakov, and the same with everyone. And the reason for this, why Moshe? So he puts that into parentheses, because all the seventh are the most cherished. Which means there's something unique about the seventh, and this seventh always has some unique power. So Moshe Rabbeinu was the seventh. Seventh from what? From Abraham. He was the seventh generation from Abraham Avinu. I guess when you say generation, we go by children. Moshe Rabbeinu's father was Amram. Amram's father was Kahas. Kahas's father was Levi. Levi's father was Yaakov, Yitzhak, Abraham. So he was the seventh. Hine Meloshin, page 39. Meloshin Razal, from the words of our sages, which means the precise way that they phrase it. Kol Hashvi Chavivim. They say all those that are seventh are cherished. It doesn't say all those that are cherished are seventh, but all those that are seventh are cherished. Muchach mizeh, this indicates she'ikra ma'ila hu zeshu chavivi, shvi, that the main and primary virtue is in the fact that they're the seventh. What does that mean? The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was the seventh, did he work on that? Did he make it happen? No, he was born in the seventh generation. In other words, being the seventh is something that Hashem puts you into that situation. And being that you're seventh, Hashem is has a special, unique connection and special power given to the seventh. Obviously, because Hashem wanted to give this person a special power, he arranged it. But what he's trying to bring out is the point that this thing came to him from above. Since because he's the seventh, that's why he has this chavivus, this Hashem cherishes this person. I know what does this mean in different words. Chavivus, that this being cherished is not because of a virtue that depends on the person's choice, or the person's desire, or the person's divine service. That I worked so hard that I became the seventh. That we say like being a kohen. Being a kohen is not because I worked on it and I refined myself and I davened a lot and I did a lot of mitzvahs and I gave a lot of tzedakah and therefore I merited to become a kohen. No. In fact, we can do somersaults and you can't become a kohen. So the only way you can become a kohen is if you're born from a father who was a kohen. The only way you can become a kohen. Same thing here, that this didn't become because of his choice. It wasn't his desire. It wasn't his divine service. He was just the seventh. Shezebah told her this is something which you're born into. But nevertheless, page 40, nevertheless, there's a certain chavivus, means Hashem cherishes those who are the seven. And that's what Moshe merited, that he was the one to give the Torah. When the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America, right in the beginning, he started, of course, giving over Hasidic teachings here in America. So one of the first Maimorim talks about this subject, Kol Hashvi Chavivim. Obviously, the fact that they have emphasized that it came to America means because all these things are related to the time and the place whenever a Rebbe says a Maimor. So apparently this is related to his arrival in America. That even though we talk about the greatest quality of the seventh, nevertheless, even when we are highlighting the advantage of the seventh, in the very words, Kol Hashvi Chavivim, we're actually emphasizing the uniqueness of the first. How's that? We're saying the seventh is the most precious. You can't have a seventh if you don't have a first. So by saying the seventh is amazing, you're also saying, if not for the first, there wouldn't be a seventh. Not for number one, there wouldn't be number seven. What does it mean spiritually? It means spiritually that what Avram Avinu did, he was the first that was sort of paving the way and preparing the ground and making it possible that ultimately will come Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the seventh. So we always have to remember there's an advantage in the seventh and there's also an advantage in the first. And in that Maimer, the previous Rebbe elaborates on the Maila, the greatness and the uniqueness of the first, who's Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu's Aveda was mainly with Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. As we know that Avram Avinu spread Hashem's name, and because of that it was being pursued, specifically by a king who considered himself and declared himself as an idol. And eventually they caught him and they threw him into a fire. And the miracle happened, which is the famous miracle of as I know, the miracle of Kivshana Eish. It was thrown into a fire and it came out alive. But obviously it meant that he knew that his life is in danger, that this king Nimrod, if he catches him, will definitely execute him. But nevertheless, he didn't stop, and he brought tens of thousands of people to believe in Hashem. So that's the Maila of the first, of Avraham Avinu. And he's not satisfied with that. He goes on to explain the uniqueness of Avraham Avinu's Mesiras Nefesh. He has another part. The Eif and Mesiras Nefesh, the kind of Mesiras he had was Shleichipas Mesiras Nefesh. He wasn't really seeking Mesiras Nefesh. He just had Mesiras Nefesh. What is that? Let me explain this first, then we'll do the words inside. We know that there were 10 great tzaddikim, which are called the 10 martyrs, which means these are very great tzaddikim, the biggest Tanoim, and the king of Rome executed them in a very, very horrible way. There's a lot of details to the story. But one of the details of the story was that when they were, at the moment that they were torturing and killing Rabbi Akiva, he was one of the 10 martyrs that gave up his life for Hashem. As they were executing him in a very barbaric way, he was saying the Shema. And he said to his students, my entire life, I was waiting when will be the opportunity for me to give up my life for Hashem. And finally, the opportunity came. And yes, he gave up his life for Hashem. He can come in. He gave up his life for Hashem, and Avraham Avinu gave up his life for Hashem, and yet there's a difference. Once you talk about giving up your life for Hashem, how can there be differences? It's a very subtle difference. It's a difference between two giants of tzaddikim, and nevertheless, it's a difference. When a person says, I always wanted, in other words, when I said the words in Shema, you should love Hashem with all your heart and with all your soul, means you should even be ready to give up your life for Hashem. But you're not allowed to do that on your own. God forbid. You're not allowed to do anything that will lead you to Chas v'Shalom losing your life. But if the situation arises that they want to force you to worship idols or something else, then it's something which a Yid should be ready to do that. Of course, here he lost his life because he was a Jew. That's why the Romans killed him. And he didn't choose to do it. On the contrary, he wanted to. But now that it came up, he said he had my chance to do it, which means he wanted to serve Hashem in the most complete, most perfect way, that there couldn't be anything higher than that. The highest, most perfect way, I mean, you can give up your money, you can give up your time, you can give up love, you can give up pleasure, you can give up convenience, you can give up everything in the world, but nothing compares to when a person actually gives up their very life for Hashem. So because he had this love for Hashem, which he couldn't satisfy, it was an incredible, unconditional love, and a love that was a passion that was on fire. He wanted to do whatever he can the most for Hashem. And when would it be complete if he'd have the opportunity to give up his life? So in a sense, he was sort of hoping for the opportunity to be able to serve Hashem in the most complete, perfect way. What?
It just feels like it's selfish love.
Chas v'Shalom, that's why I said we're talking about great tzaddikim. So the fact that he wanted this was not because he wanted something selfish, like have a bigger piece of fish in Olam Haba, or a bigger chunk of chicken when it comes to the Gan Eden. It was all about, he wanted to sort of connect to Hashem on the deepest level possible. But subtle, on a very subtle level, it means I wanted to connect to Hashem. So it's not selfish. It's still all about connecting to Hashem, but there's still a certain dot of I here.
But Hashem's deepest ratzon is for us to exist on this world.
Right, but not when you're forced, obviously. That's why he never did it. That's for sure. He didn't allow himself to get carried away. In fact, he's the famous Rabbi Akiva that went in with the other three people into those deep secrets of Kabbalah, and they all unfortunately came out damaged by it, and he was the one who held on tight, so he knew that the purpose was there. And now he had the opportunity, which according to Hashem's will, he was meant to do it, so he did it. Avraham Avinu, the Mesiras Nefesh for Avraham Avinu wasn't because he wanted Mesiras Nefesh to be sort of his way of serving Hashem. No, he was out to do one thing, to publicize to the whole world, everybody should know about Hashem. And his desire to publicize Hashem was unconditional, nothing would stop him. To the point that even if it meant his life, he wouldn't stop. So in other words, his goal was not to give up his life for Hashem, his goal was to publicize Hashem's name. So even that little bit of that I'm being more complete, I'm being more perfect spiritually, by doing this, even that thought Avraham Avinu didn't have. But again, remember, this is on a very subtle level, a very high level, not chas v'shalom that this is someone who thinks about himself. Yeah.
How did Abraham give up his life for Hashem?
Who?
Abraham.
He gave up his life. He allowed himself to be thrown into a furnace of fire. But Hashem made a miracle that he didn't die. With Rabbi Akiva, there was no such miracle. So obviously with Avraham Avinu, Hashem didn't want it to happen. With Rabbi Akiva, there was a purpose and a reason why it did happen. So in a sense, it's like with Rabbi Akiva, giving up his life was almost like an end in itself, serving Hashem through Mesiras Nefesh. By Avraham Avinu, it was only a means to an end. His end was just to let the world know that Hashem exists. And if it meant giving up my life, I'll do that also. But that wasn't his intention, and that wasn't part of his goal, that in any way he'll become more connected through that. In other words, if you want to put it this way, with Avraham Avinu, it was, if we were even allowed to say these words, it was 199.99.99.99.99% Hashem, and some little dot, there's still something there. And with, Rabbi Akiva, with Avraham Avinu, it was 100%, it wasn't even that little dot of me. Let's see the words inside. This is all what the previous Rebbe said in that Maimon. This marked the distinction between Avraham Avinu's Mesiras Nefesh and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva set Mesiras Nefesh as a goal for his divine service. And he said, when will I be afforded the opportunity to have Mesiras Nefesh that I can actualize it? But Avraham Avinu's Mesiras Nefesh, by contrast, was incidental to his actual service. He knew that the main objective of divine service was creating an awareness of Hashem's presence to the whole world. Page 42. Like it says, and he called out the name of Hashem, that Hashem is the God of all the world, the whole world. And if the Gemara says, Vayikra, don't read these words only as he called, but Vayakri means he made other people call. The Rebbe said this in Yiddish, Yan is al Oich Shrine. No, he said the whole Maimon in Yiddish. But when the Maimon was written, the Rebbe made sure this should be written in Yiddish. That means it's being emphasized that even our Nefesh Bahamis in those days who speaks Yiddish should get it. And if we need Mesiras Nefesh, by the way, there's also Mesiras Nefesh, but that's not the goal. The Kol Kach God Lo Mas the bottom of the page. And Avraham Avinu's service of Mesiras Nefesh was so great, that this is really what enabled Moshe. The fact that Moshe had the schutz, that he was the one who gave the Torah. Why was it? Because he was the seventh from Avraham Avinu. So at the same time that we're sort of lifting Moshe Rabbeinu and saying, wow, he was the seventh, also this in itself implies, but it's because he came as a continuation of the first. One of the things that the Rebbe did in this mimer was that, as you'll see, I don't know how much you'll see, there's a few minutes, But was that he bring in every Basar Lagani Maimer, the Rebbe made a point to bring something of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, the Alter Rebbe, Mittel Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, and the previous Rebbe. Which means, and the implication was that what's going on now is actually a continuation of everything that started before. And it's only because of everything that started before. I don't know if you know this part of the story when the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested in Russia for spreading Yiddishkeit at that time, where they wanted to execute him, and miraculously he was saved. And we celebrate this on Yud Tammuz. There's a lot of details to the story, but one detail was that when he came in and they told him to walk over to one of the desks where there were secretaries asking him to answer questions, the questions he answered was the way he wanted to answer them, whether he liked it or not. So when they asked him, what's your occupation? Then my occupation is to teach Chassidus, which brings out Hashem is one, and the whole world. And she goes, I can't write this on my paper over here. I didn't tell you to write it. You asked me, what's my occupation? This is my occupation. That's the way all the questions went. One of the questions was, how old are you? So he said 150 something years old. I said, are you making, and most people, when they went to this jail, were trembling from fear. They say that in Russia, people didn't even walk a block away from this jail because it had such fear connected to it. It was a torture chamber of the worst order. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was just saying what he wanted to say. So she looked at him, you're cracking jokes here? This is a series. Well, how old are you? So he said, I'm not coming here as an individual. I'm coming here as a continuation of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, and my father, 154 or 53 years old. So every Rebbe looked at himself, like it says here, the seventh has this and this quality. Every Rebbe had certain qualities, but it's all a continuation of, that was the humility of every tzaddik understood. It's all coming as one chain, one continuation. So the Rebbe made a point in this Maimah, Basar Lagani, in fact, every year to do that. And I remember that before Yud Shvat, the Rebbe wanted us to be able to absorb the Maimah properly. So the Rebbe would give out references. We hang it up, the references was hung up on the wall in the yeshiva. We should look up in advance which Maimah he's going to bring from the Alter Rebbe, which from the Mittel Rebbe, which from the Tzemach Tzedek, which from the Rebbe Marash, which from the Rebbe Rashab, and which from the previous Rebbe, so that when he says the Maimah, we'll be familiar with the subject and be able to grasp it. So here too, Avraham Avinu was the first, Moshe Rabbeinu was the seventh. But the greatness of the seventh is that he comes as a continuation of the first. In fact, it says in Chumash that Moshe Rabbeinu was complaining to Hashem, why are you making the Eden suffer? Hashem said to him, the other one, blessed be, told Moshe, do not stand in the place of the great people, which means Avraham Avinu. They never complained. Which means even though his greatness was greater than theirs, because we see he was the seventh, he gave the Torah, he built the Mishkan, he brought the Shekhinah down. And nevertheless, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that Avraham Avinu is the first, and it's all also because of Avraham Avinu. I don't know what it was related to, but I remember once driving, I don't drive, but someone else was driving, and I was in the car. We passed it in the country, we passed this huge billboard. It was an advertisement for some company, maybe 7-Up, I don't know what it was. It said if there's no number 1, there's no number 7. So that's the Basar Lagani. How did they know that? Okay. We'll stop now. Mrs. Nemi will teach level 2. We'll go, everyone will teach level 1. I'm sorry you have to carry the chairs back and forth, but we did make sure you shouldn't have to bring them from the dorm, so Baruch Hashem. Very welcome. Did you slip this in?
It did.
Thank you.
I feel for one about the night. Usually there's three, today there's none.
Thank you very much. Mazel tov for your son. Mazel tov for your son.
I was like, friend, I was so embarrassed.
You was it you?
Fuck my girl.
Real? One more.
Yeah, you have to live in Nolan. Did you see my
It's in your folder. It's right there. Here? In your folder. Here? In your, no. Where's the, here? It's right there, yeah.